What's up, people? Welcome back to the channel for the latest Q&A. Getting right into things. Not really a fitness-related one. Easy ones. When is your birthday? And I promise I didn't plan this at all. It was yesterday. I think this is probably reversed, but my wife got me a birthday cake that had a crown as well. Favorite food? Probably pizza. Get that pineapple shit out of here, basement body. Like, I see you. I see you. What are you doing, pineapple? Yeah, it's carbs, but shame on you. Favorite drink? Coffee for sure. Favorite movie? I'm gonna say Lord of the Rings, although I gotta give a shout out to John Carter. I saw a YouTube video recently. It said top 20 movies that killed their actors' careers. I thought it was a pretty damn decent movie, actually. I thought it was underrated, and it was a total flop, probably just a lack of promotion. Favorite TV show growing up? Simpsons, Futurama, a whole bunch of them. Let's see. Favorite style of music? I'm all over the place. Rap, hip-hop, rock, you know, not just one genre. It's hard to pick one. Favorite video game? Growing up, I was really into sort of role-playing games, Baldur's Gate, Planescape Torment, sort of Dungeons and Dragons type of stuff. And it's just a good way to relax. Favorite sport? This is a bit tricky. I would say probably soccer, football to Europeans. And then favorite YouTuber? I do like PewDiePie. I think he's a good dude overall. And then Penguin Zero. And then finally, drop it down a little bit. Favorite position? And one of the comments said, favorite position would be probably deficit deadlifts. And yeah, that is spot on. You know the lore, because I do love getting over in a bent over position. All right, next question. Edging for T-level boost. Now, I don't know what that is. I'm not familiar with that term. I assume this is something like microdosing testosterone or something. But in general, I think people overestimate how much transient increases or decreases in testosterone levels matter. I think they even overemphasize long-term how much testosterone levels are going to impact their physique. I mean, sure, if you start juicing, it might have a significant impact. But I think for most people, if you're within the normal range and you buy some product thinking it'll boost you up and therefore get you turning into the Hulk, you're going to be sorely disappointed. Muscle growth is a training adaptation. Unless you just start throwing the kitchen sink into, the pharma at it, I really don't think this is even really worth focusing on. And you get these guys who are like, I stopped doing this and suddenly I feel superhuman. Okay, that's probably a sign that you felt like shit before because you were addicted to it. And now you feel normal. Congratulations. You feel how you should feel, and you think it's superhuman because you're just comparing it to how things were before. Like, some people got to bring themselves up. Other people have to bring themselves down. You know what I'm saying? That alpha lifestyle, you gotta relax a little bit into it, and other people need to bring themselves up out of their parents' basement. So, it kind of just depends on where you are. And you get all these people bringing themselves up to normal, preaching how it's so good. You kind of just outed yourself as being a beta. All right, question 19, getting into the training ones. Finally, I don't pick the order of the questions, by the way. There's a lot of talk about strength standards, but what about hypertrophy standards? For example, how much should I expect my arms to grow in a year? So strength standards are sort of fixed. Oh, 2 plates in the bench. It's not how much will I gain on my bench in a year, which is a little bit different. It would be like, oh, what is a good arm measurement? Oh, 16 inches. That's different from how much will you gain in a year. So it depends on where you are. I would say if you are, the smaller you are and the further you are away from whatever your potential is, the faster you'll be able to grow. I would say for most guys, if they are under 15 inches, growing an inch on your arms in a year, if you haven't done specific arm training before, is very realistic. Like, I have a video on how I gained an inch on my arms in a year. I think that was from 16.5 to 17.5, I want to say. I couldn't do that now. I mean, now that my arms are 18.5 for this one and just under 18 for this one, I'm not going to gain an inch on my arms in a year. I mean, I might not gain an inch on my arms ever for the rest of my lifting career. So the further you go, the more diminishing the returns. Furthermore, because it is a measurement like a circle, the more you gain, the harder it is to gain, because each time you gain, you're gaining more gains. So in other words, going from an 18 to a 19 isn't as much as going from a 19 to a 20. And then going 20 to 21 is even more mass on that ass, and by ass I mean arm. Glute spread when? I guess that technically is a question, and it received sufficient upvotes. Classy GVS community. But the answer is whenever I get desperate enough for views that I'm going to start clickbaiting people with extremely sexual thumbnails. So probably never. You know, don't hold your breath, or do if you upvoted this. By the way, this video is sponsored by Boostcamp. So if you want a way to track and measure and manage your progress in the gym and get the most out of your time and your energy and your effort, check out Boostcamp. They will help a ton. It also gives you access to some of the best programs out there. I have 3 programs up there: Rampage, Ravage, and the Recovering Power Lifter program. You can use code GVS. I think you get 1 or 2 free weeks of the premium. And so you can check that out. I will leave a link in the description. Once again, thank you to Boostcamp for sponsoring this video. Question number 17, how do you best program? Okay. You guys were in a mood this week. Man, you guys gotta get outside and get some out of your system. 3 sets of 10. There's the answer. Question 16, finally a real question. Would you recommend dynamic double progression for all lifts? Part of me thinks that the rep goal system could work better for isolations because you'll be pushing those much closer to failure, but I'm not sure. Ooh, I actually disagree. I think you should not be pushing your isolations, quote unquote, much closer to failure. I think there's a general trend for isolations to be closer to failure, but much closer? I mean, if you're keeping like 4 more reps in reserve on compounds compared to isolations, I think you're kind of messing things up. So I think you can use dynamic double progression for both. I think you could use rep goal for both. I tend to, I mean, you can always decrease the weight, by the way. If your sort of rep range that you're targeting is, let's say, 8 to 10, and you get sort of 10, 8, and it was really hard, and you want a 3rd set, you can decrease the weight. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And you might need to, especially on exercises that are very fatiguing. I mean, if I do an all-out set of 10 on RDLs, I'm probably going to have to drop the weight by like 10 or maybe even 15 or 20%, depending on how hard the set was, to stay in the same rep range, just because it's a much more fatiguing exercise when I'm really, really pushing hard and getting after it. And that's totally fine, and that's still dynamic double progression. I think that's where the dynamic is something that's worth looking into, and it is very, very useful. All right, next question. How vital is volume really? Can an intermediate make gains on a low volume program like DC? Or do you think it's more beginners who can benefit from that? Your view on volume seems to have changed over the years, so I'd love to know what current day Geoff says. Thanks for all the magnificent content. Wow, it's a big adjective for my content. Thank you. My views have changed and they've gone back and forth. And at this point, it's very individual. So I look at someone's training history, I look at what they can recover from, and I look at how they're progressing. And if you're progressing on low volume, even as an intermediate, even when you're more advanced, totally fine. That's great. In fact, that's probably the best possible option for most people. My only point is that for a lot of people, low volume is just going to be underdoing it. Even if you're pushing the sets really hard, you just might be the kind of person where you're never getting sore, you're never getting beaten up, you're not naturally strong. And so when you do more, sometimes your progression is better. Volume is just a means to drive progression. So doing volume for the sake of just doing volume, you're doing the volume wrong. There needs to be an objective, and that objective is going to be getting stronger on your chosen lifts for medium to moderate reps, or perhaps high reps, some low reps. And that has to be the goal. If you're just like, yeah, I'm in a volume phase, and you're getting weaker, that's probably not a good sign. I mean, maybe you could stay the same, and then you drop the volume later, and then you make better progress, but that doesn't always pan out. And I think you really do want to be viewing volume as a way to get over plateaus by getting stronger. And so I've never said that performance doesn't matter. It absolutely matters. And on a week-by-week basis, it is the most important metric, because you're not going to be like wrapping a tape measure around your arm like, oh, I gained 1/8 of an inch. First of all, you probably didn't. Second of all, you don't know. And when you're very advanced, I mean, that might be a year of progress anyway. So you can't really use that to inform if your training is working or not. Next question, kind of a weird one. Which would you choose? Power shrugs in Japan, rack pulls in Poland, or Zercher squats in Mexico? I would say power shrugs in Japan, and this is just a convenience one. I live in China, so it's just sort of a quick hop across the water. And then power shrugs, I love me some power shrugs. And so that would just be, I'm familiar with both a little bit. I've been to Japan. Okay, fine, just the airport. But I'd like to see more than just the airport, so we could take a nice vacation there. I think my wife would enjoy it. Rack pulls, I do like some rack pulls. Poland, it's a bit far away. Maybe it could be an option. Zercher squats in Mexico, I'm not really familiar with Zercher squats. Never been to Mexico, so that's a bit of a leap. That's both that are new, so maybe a bit much there. So perhaps I'll ease into those later too. Never. All right, next question. How do I stop plateaus for bench press? All other lifts have been increasing, but bench press and other similar variations. So yeah, in general, I would say pushing and pressing are the most stubborn lifts. Lower body progression seems to often just go on and on and on and on really well. And then pulling also seems to be fairly smooth going. But yeah, pushing and pressing, I'm not entirely sure why. I think perhaps it's because pulling movements are often more cheatable, so that happens. And then lower body, often people have kind of been skipping it, so they're a little bit more undertrained, so they have sort of a longer runway to go. Whereas almost no one skips bench press. So your bench press is probably relatively more advanced than your other lifts, and that's very common. It sounds like you're doing, what, 9 sets per week for chest? If you're recovering well, you might want to bump that up. That's a little bit on the low side. I also would probably want to see your technique, just because often the bench press is an ego lift. Often it's the biggest ego lift in terms of like numbers. And so often what I see is that people claim to be bench pressing for hypertrophy, and then they're using these hyper optimized setups. They're like bouncing the bar, heaving the bar. They're having a partner help them and stuff. So they're not actually getting a ton of quality chesticle stimulus from their sets. And then, yeah, they're plateaued. So I would look into maybe some accessories. And this is sort of getting into powerlifting a little bit. You might want a close grip. You're already doing incline. You're already doing dips as well. So I would say some close grip work could be useful. Some pause work, like a long pause, is pretty useful as well. To work on the triceps, work on staying tight. You might want to work on your technique as well. So there could be a lot of things here. And yeah, you might just be underdoing it. And so adding in a little bit more volume than 9 sets might be worth trying. It also depends on how advanced you are. Like I see some guys plateau with under 1 plate as their PR. Okay, like, we don't really need to fine tune things too much. But if you're plateauing with 3+ plates as a natural lifter, okay, that's like very, very normal. So you're probably going to need more specific programming in terms of like building up the lift and then deloading and being a little bit more methodical with things and specific with the training in order to keep progressing. So it kind of depends on where you are. I have no idea how strong you are. And so, yeah, the prescription's a little bit difficult for this one. Next question, slower eccentric and a pause with less reps, or faster with a bounce from the bottom with more reps for pure hypertrophy? I'm not entirely sure which lift you're talking about, and it might change if it's a bench press versus if it's a squat. I think a pause is a good option for a lot of lifts, but it's not as necessary as I used to think. I think the main benefit of a slow eccentric is just safety. It's just that it beats you up less. So if you say, oh, I'm an advanced lifter and I have a history of pec tears or pec tweaks, should I do a slower eccentric and a pause at the bottom for my bench press? Yes, absolutely. But if you've never had any issues and you're talking about a squat, do I need to take 8 seconds on the way down for a squat? You probably don't. I think you should probably use control, explode, control, explode. If you want to use a pause, that's fine, but I would count it as a different variation because performance is going to be different. If you pause all your reps, I don't see anything wrong with that, but it is certainly far from a requirement. Same thing with the slow tempo. If it works for you, it's fine, but I think it can be exaggerated to the point where now the weight on the bar is just so low that you're not getting very much out of the concentric. I mean, you see the people where everything is super controlled and they almost look bored on the way down and they're squatting like half a plate or something. You're like, all right, well, is this really the way to get big, or would putting a little bit more weight on the bar and emphasizing progression over technique be the answer? Probably. Our next question, you've trained with really high volumes. When you've gone down to lower volumes, what are some things you notice in terms of muscle gain? Just saw a Will Tennyson poster-related video to it. So, looking back to when I gained the most gains, 2021 to 2022, I was doing a lot of volume, and it was really hard. And I felt really tired a lot of the time, but I was progressing really well. And so I think a lot of people, they feel tired or they feel beaten up. I mean, I got biceps tendonitis, but I still put an inch on my arms in a year, right? Like I worked around it. And I'm not advocating that. I'm not advising that. But just because you don't feel 100% doesn't mean that training isn't working. And so you'll probably feel better if you reduce your volume, right? And you might even progress slightly better as you peak, right? So you have your high volume, you pull that out, you drop it down, and then you see a bump in performance. Well, yeah, you're just fresher, right? You're just not as tired. And so, oh, I hit a PR on lower volume. No, you hit a PR because you did higher volume before, and then you drop the fatigue, and then you might plateau later, right? A couple months down the line of this lower volume, oh, now things have stagnated, and you say, oh, lower volume doesn't work. Well, maybe it worked because of what you did before. So training is not static, and it really does depend on what you did before. And I think there is maybe some logic for cycling your volume. Oh, now here's a slightly higher emphasized phase for lower body, and then upper body is maybe more maintenance, and then you can switch that a few months later. I think when you're more advanced, specialization phases with higher volumes could make a lot of sense. Now, if you're a beginner, I wouldn't really recommend high volume on anything because you probably don't need it. And often when you start doing higher volume, it dilutes the effort of your sets to the point where they're not even good sets anyway. And you want to learn good technique first, and then how to train hard second. And then you can kind of play around with the dose of volume. And this is not exactly a response to Will because I haven't seen his video. Also keep in mind though that volume doesn't always have to go up, right? Like if you were doing 15 sets per week for quads, you can probably still gain at 10, right? It's not like you always have to go up, especially if you learn how to train harder and get more out of the sets. I mean, I could still make good gains on pretty modest volumes. They just might be a little bit better gains with higher volumes, but it kind of beats you up and you lose motivation and you're kind of tired and stuff. And so you kind of have to freshen up at times. And there's just as much art as science here, and you have to know yourself. And I will be doing a video on lifting wisdom, which incorporates some of these ideas. Hey, Geoff, congratulations on the growth of the channel. My question isn't fitness related, but I figured I'd ask, what is one dish that you enjoy in China that isn't particularly eaten in America? LOL. I would say organ meats in general. Like I remember cooking up beef heart. I didn't know what it was. I just bought it and it's actually pretty damn good. And I actually think that Liver King kind of ruined this. I think he was spot on with the organ meat thing. Super nutritious, very dense in terms of micronutrients. But he kind of was a bit of a turd, and so he ruined that concept. I think liver is great. I think heart is great. Spleen. There's some other ones as well, like pig stomach and stuff. Like, I think these are just not eaten in America. And actually, I mean, chicken feet are shipped from America to China because they don't eat them in America. And so, yeah, just kind of foods like that are either just not eaten or they're looked down on when actually they could be perfectly reasonable to consume. All right, next question. Regarding progression, 1, getting in the stimulus during a session and allowing progressive overload to come to you instead of the other way around, chasing numbers. Or 2, having some semblance of periodization. Example, Bald Omni-Man's recent video about 6 and 10 week phases. Which would you lean towards if life variables, sleep primarily, is not at its best? So I would say if this is a short-term thing, probably the first one, because sometimes pushing progression too much, you end up actually kind of shooting yourself in the foot, and it's too stressful, and I need to do this, but you don't feel good, and maybe you're getting less stimulus now because you're pushing and your technique is not being good, or you're rushing the reps, etc. And so ironically, pushing for progression results in worse progression because you're getting less stimulus. So I would say probably the first one, but there's also some merit to the second one, because I think for a lot of people on some lifts, they kind of fake themselves out. Like they don't really, they think, okay, well, I need to wait for the progression to happen. And it just never happens, Well, squats are not feeling great. Whereas maybe you could add weight. You're doing small up or something. You feel like shit. You feel like crap warming up. You're really sore, really beaten up. And then 20 or 30 minutes later, you're setting a PR. Like, what? I felt like crap. The only reason you were able to do that is because it was written on a fucking piece of paper and it said, hey, you have to do this, and so you do that. And so I think there is something to a more strict program saying that here's the weight you got to do, man up and do it, because for a lot of people, they'll kind of think themselves out of a personal best or in terms of progression. So I could see either way, and maybe try both and see which one works. Keep in mind that there's pros and cons to each one. And this is where having a coach is useful, because a coach can see your sets, and you might think, oh, that was so hard. And then I see your set, and I'm like, yeah, you probably had a few reps in reserve. All right, let's up the weight. And he's like, up the weight? That felt difficult. Yeah, but it was mentally difficult. Like, there's more in the tank if you want to take those reps. And I think in a lot of cases, you probably should. All right, next question. I'm not sure what percentage of your viewers are female. I think it's a pretty small percent. Let's keep going. I don't know if this question is worth answering on your channel. Well, it got enough upvotes, so maybe you have a decent chunk of female viewers, so maybe the male viewers would be interested too. How do you recommend people change up their lifting or nutrition throughout their menstrual cycle? I'm not sure how common the knowledge is, but our cycles can impact strength, recovery, nutritional needs. Yeah, it can impact appetite, I know, and then like cravings for some certain foods. I find every month I go off program a bit, and whilst it's annoying, I don't know how to work around or improve it. So I would say that take that week or so as maybe not necessarily a deload, but give yourself as much flexibility as you need. Even if you have to take days off, if things are bad, if you're getting cramps, and again, I'm a man, I don't have personal experience with these things. But if you need to take days off, I don't think that's going to really impact long-term progress. If you have to count it as a deload, if you have to reduce sets or weight in the bar even, I think those are all totally reasonable. In terms of nutrition, again, it can impact your appetite, your hunger, your cravings, your weight as well. Water weight is definitely a thing, bloating, etc. And so I'm probably not the best guy to ask here. I don't coach very many women at all. It's almost entirely male at this point. I've seen some research on strength changes during the menstrual cycle, but then other people debunk that, and so I'm not entirely sure. I wish I could be more of help here, but it's certainly not my area of expertise. All right, next question, super simple one. What's in your gym bag? Two different types of straps, the figure eights, which I use for deadlifting, and then the sort of wraparound ones, which I use mostly for single arm pulls or pull-ups. I try not to use the straps if I don't need them. So when people see me doing some kind of row or whatever, and I'm not using straps, people ask me about it. Well, if I don't need them, I don't use them. If my performance with straps or without straps is the same, I don't use straps because I want to be able to have at least some amount of grip strength, right? I was using them too much before, and then I noticed my grip was getting weaker, and I was like, fuck that shit. Like, I don't want to have some weak-ass bitch grip. Now, if you need to use them, then use them. I think it's totally fine. But if you need them for even very light weights, like I see guys using straps to dumbbell row 10 kilos, I'm like, all right, well, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But if a client asked me about it, I'd be like, you know, work your grip at least to a certain level, right? So two different types of straps, squat shoes if I'm squatting that day, and that's about it. I think maybe a sports drink, which I get on the way to the gym, but that's pretty much it. I don't wear a belt, and so yeah, that's about it. I don't use a dip belt for weighted dips or weighted pull-ups. I just plop a dumbbell between my knees, and so yeah, it's a pretty empty bag. I don't like carrying around too much stuff. Travel light, and at least I personally don't really need much else. Next question: for unilateral exercises like Bulgarian split squats and one-arm rows, which limb should you do first? The strong one or the weak one? Should we hold the effort in the strong limb, keeping more reps in the tank, in order to match the weak limb's progress? So the safe answer, which someone actually responded down below, was do your weak first and then match it with the strong one. And I think that's good general advice, but I don't necessarily do that. I tend to just do max reps anyway, because I found that this didn't really help with imbalances anyway. I think if you have a strength imbalance due to a differing muscle size, maybe. But if it's an imbalance just because of your alignment or your structure, which I have several of those, I don't find that actually helps. And I've done that for several years, you know, trying it months on, months off. It didn't really seem to make a big difference. So I tend to just do max reps for each one. And, you know, like, am I going to hold back this arm because this arm is smaller? No, because when I flex with one arm, I want this one arm to be as big as possible. So, yeah, I would say the safe answer is to hold yourself back, but that's not really what I do personally. In review, you said that your arm day was arms, shoulders, and some rotator cuff stuff. Could you explain why and what are these rotator cuff stuff? Thank you so much for the great content. So I look at my bro day as arms, side delts, rear delts, and then whatever else I need. So that might be rotator cuff stuff, so probably just face pulls, which can also be for the delts, for the upper back. But it also might be, maybe I need some hip stuff. Maybe my hip is bothering me and I need to do some kind of mobility work. Maybe abdominals, maybe forearms, maybe even calves a little bit, maybe neck work, etc. And so it really does just depend on what I need, as long as it doesn't impact other days. So I have my lower body day the day after that. So I might, you know, I'm not going to do anything that is going to bother my hinges or my squats in particular. And then I trained chest and back the day before. So I am most likely not working those more either, because they are usually still recovering. Now, I have done rows twice in a row before. And I think this can be occasionally a good idea, but it's also easy to overdo, and so I don't do that as much anymore. But yeah, it's basically arms and delts, and then sort of supplementary stuff, because bodybuilding requires a lot of different areas that usually get overlooked, and so this is the day to put a lot of that stuff, one of which could be working your rotator cuff or any other areas that you might need. So it could be rotator cuff, could be not rotator cuff. It kind of depends on where you are in your training. Question number 4, is staying with the same program for 2 years and progressing slowly actually better than swapping programs every 3 months or so? I don't know. So 3 months is a pretty good chunk of time. You know, if you said 1 month or you said 3 weeks or something, I would say, okay, you want more consistency than that. But 3 months, doing 4 training cycles a year, I think that's a pretty good chunk of time. And having that novelty might actually make sense. I mean, that's part of the reason why I do coaching blocks in 3 months, because it's enough time to see progress, you know, in terms of strength, in terms of appearance even, especially if it's fat loss. And it's also a good sort of amount of time to maybe break things up and start a new training phase after that amount of time. And so, yeah, 3 months I think is actually totally fine. And I actually maybe wouldn't stay with the same program for 2 years. That's a lot of time to stay with the same exact program. I mean, your programming should probably be a bit more dynamic, where you're swapping exercises in and out at least every 2, 3, 4 months. So you don't necessarily have to start a completely new program, but hey, I'm feeling my hack squats in my knees a little bit more. They're feeling stale. I'm plateauing. I'm just not really up for this anymore. I'm going to switch them out for another movement. That's totally reasonable every few months. The issue is when it's like 2 weeks. Now I see this, and it's sort of a shiny object syndrome kind of approach. That is where there is an issue, because you're not actually getting that momentum in your training. And so if you can have better progression with the same program, great. If you can have better progression with different programs, great. If you can have better progression from one program that is slowly evolving and morphing, and you're moving in exercises and out exercises and maybe tweaking rep ranges, great. All of them can work. It kind of just depends on where you are in your lifting career, your personal preferences, and some people, they just enjoy swapping exercises more. Other people, they enjoy a more consistent approach. And I think ultimately both can work as long as you're not swapping too often. That being said, conjugate is a thing where you're swapping all the fucking time. And I think that can work when you're really advanced and you need even more consistent rotations and a lack of consistency in your rotation in order to stay healthy and stay in one piece. And yeah, that can be a thing as well. So there are many roads to Rome. Some of them might be faster or slower. And I would take all of them at some point in your training career in order to try to find out which one will work the best. For muscles that have two very distinct functions, like the hamstrings, which perform hip extension and knee flexion, can you maintain size and performance training just one of these functions? I'm doing a squat specialization right now, and I find I get 2 tacks doing RDLs while squatting heavy multiple times per week. So wondering if I can maintain hamstring size and hinging performance with just a lying leg curl. You can probably maintain size, but you might not maintain performance. The RDL, it's not a super technical lift, but I would not expect your curl to carry over to your RDL. That really has not been my experience. It's like saying, oh, if I do my leg presses, then my squat will get better if I'm doing a deadlift specialization phase. Probably not, because it is technical enough that you want specific practice. That being said, yes, the lower back might be already approaching what it can recover from. And so you might want to do something like a back extension, which is a little bit more sort of hamstring focused, and which actually sort of opens up the lower back in that bottom position, maybe reverse hyperextension, compared to an RDL, in order to maintain that hinging pattern while also reducing stress on the lower back. It kind of depends on how long the training block is as well. A few weeks, that's not really an issue. But if you're running like a really long, several month-long squatting specialization phase, you're probably going to get some performance loss. And I would say the more advanced you are, the more strength you have to lose. So the stronger you are, the more it'll impact your strength negatively. Whereas if you're a beginner, I mean, you're probably not going to be as strong, and so your strength doesn't have as far to fall. All right, next question. Not hypertrophy related. How dare you? But would like to know more about running, how to program it into my lifting routine without hindering recovery, and general milestones or baselines for novice, intermediate, advanced runners. I've been getting into running lately, and I want to take it a bit more seriously, and knowing your background and how much you preach it, would love to know more. Congrats on 140K, by the way. Thank you. So, in terms of programming, full disclosure, I have not really done very much hybrid training. I don't run very much just because for me, lifting is a main focus, and it does take away from that, especially when I'm heavier. It's just harder on the knees, harder on the hips, harder on even like the calf, the Achilles. Carrying around 220, 230 pounds when I'm bulked up, that is a lot of stress and pressure on the joints, I have found. Whereas when I was a runner and I was 150 pounds, I mean, it's a different experience. When you're running, when you're bulked up, oh man, I feel sorry for the ground. If any of you have been experiencing tremors in your, oh no, oh shit. Sorry, I was just going for a run. But I would say for me, what impacts my lower body performance in the gym, squatting and hinging, more than anything, would be running. If I go for a run, it doesn't even have to be a lot. The day before a lower body workout, like guaranteed not great performance. So I would put it as far the fuck away from your lower body work as possible. It also depends on your goals. I mean, if you're really serious about running, yeah, lifting might need to take a little bit of a backseat, especially if you were a very, very good lifter. Now, if you are kind of a beginner in both, you can still make progress in both for sure. It depends on your mileage as well. If you want to get ready for a marathon and you're taking it seriously and you're running 60, 70, 80 miles a week or more, which is what is going to be required for maximizing performance there, I mean, yeah, you might not be able to get in a ton of lifting if that's the only thing that you are focused on. I mean, when people talk about my volume, realize that that's all I'm doing. I'm not doing any other athletic endeavors besides like walking. In terms of milestones, I was super elitist as a runner. I won't get into like my personal bests or what I could have done because it's like big, oh, I benched 4 plates in high school kind of vibes. You don't have any proof of what you could have done, right? I would say anything slower than a 7-minute mile for a man is strong, get the fuck out of here energy. And that, again, that's pretty elitist, but like, yeah, that's not that difficult unless you're pretty heavy, etc. 6-minute mile is quite good. I think that's a good goal for a lot of people. Even if you're into lifting, I think 6-minute mile, very, very doable. 5-minute mile is excellent. That is very, very good. And as a runner, as a lifter, that is going to be quite difficult to achieve, especially if you're on the heavier side. I'm actually kind of getting interested in like what I could do with hybrid training. And then into the 4s, the closer you are to 4, the more world-class it is. And then anything under a 4-minute mile is very, very good. And the world record's 3:43.13 by Hisham El Garouj in 1999, I want to say. I was super into running. If you guys think I'm into lifting, I was really into running. But you can't choose exactly what you are good at, what your proclivities are. And so if you have a passion for something, but it's not something that you're innately super, super gifted at, you can still get to a pretty damn good level, like top 1% easily for sure, compared to the general population. Yeah, I was, in hindsight, I was never going to be like completely world-class as a runner. But, you know, I enjoyed it. All right, question number 1. Do you think the width of your grip on pull-ups truly makes a difference when it comes to how your lats grow? I've seen science-based lifters like Geoff say there's no noticeable difference in going wider. However, Alex Leonidas praises super wide grip pull-ups for building width, and old school bodybuilders like Arnold seem to have thought that the wider you go, the more width you build. What are your thoughts? So I think both are right, and I'm not just saying that like, oh, he doesn't want to piss anyone off. I think that if you look at a scientific study, a lot of differences kind of get washed out. And any grip of pull-up is a fucking good pull-up. It's a good exercise, right? And so you're essentially comparing good exercises to good exercises in a population that is often untrained or undertrained or new to training or pure beginner. And so, yeah, you're not going to see differences in a low sample size N of 12 study or something in terms of differences in lat growth. But I do think that when a lot of old school lifters kind of view something as common knowledge, there probably is a difference there, right? Because they're not they're very in tune with their bodies. They're very advanced. They've often plateaued. Oh, when I do wider grip, like it makes this area flare out here. And it does. If you use a wider grip, you can almost like flare your lats and your teres major out like this. Whereas with your neutral grip, or if you're narrow grip, if you're not super wide, you can't get that same stretching around the scapula that you can with a wider grip. That being said, wider grip, and I think Alex has talked about this, it is harder on the shoulders for sure, because you're being pulled up like this, and it's a very sort of unnatural position that can take a while to get used to. Plus, most people just can't do a whole bunch of reps in that position with their body weight. You have to be very strong, stronger than with a sort of narrower grip, and certainly stronger than an underhand grip where you can use a lot of biceps and you're very sort of leveraged in terms of the advantage of just pulling like this. You can really get your lats in line with the pull. However, out wide, yeah, I think it's more teres, I think, than lat. But I also can see that if you're very, very strong and you're able to really get up, I can see how that contraction of the lat is something that you almost can't get as much with that narrower grip. So I would say if you are very strong, it's more of a contender. But if you're not as strong, maybe stick to pull downs or assisted work, and you can maybe get the same effect. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter that much, though, because you can use a wide variety of different grips, and I think you should in order to prevent overuse. So whenever someone says something like, what's the best grip on pull-ups? You should probably be doing several, and you should most likely be rotating them in and out. See the previous question. And that's what Alex does, where he has some neutral, he has some overhand, I think he has some underhand, he has super wide, and he rotates these through in order to prevent overuse. And I think that is a good idea for the vast majority of people. And there's really very little downside, because often these lifts are close enough that they actually do build each other. I mean, your ultra wide grip might not build your underhand narrow, because those are quite different, but every sort of neutral and narrow neutral and different hand positions, the more similar they are, the more they're going to build each other. And so I think getting strong at a wide variety of grips is just a good idea. All right, that's all for this video. If you want to know more about proper programming practices and get the most out of your training, definitely check out my books. I will link them in a pinned comment down below. They might save you years. I'm not exaggerating at all. I have had people say that I've made more progress in the past 2 or 3 months after reading your books than the previous 2 or 3 years. Not any exaggeration at all. And so those might be worth looking into. I think they're like 20 or 30 bucks. And so that could be a good investment in your training. Thank you so much for the support, and thank you so much for watching. And I'll see you in the next video. Peace.